So what do you remember about Song of Solomon? It is written by Solomon. It's poetry. It's a love story, love poem. Married love. Not immoral love. We pointed out last week how much the Bible condemns immoral love, adultery and fornication and prostitution, all of that. I'd have to go back and look, but I think it was 3 times per book of the Bible is how frequently those words are mentioned. But God has given us one book out of the 66 to help us understand that married love is good and right and wholesome and pure. God designed it and He created it that way. So we got through an introduction in chapter 1 last week. We will look at chapter 2 and 3 and potentially chapter 4 tonight. So if you haven't turned to Song of Solomon yet, chapter 2 is where we will be. A few months ago, we had a preachers meeting. Swartz Creek is kind of centralized from all the preachers that come to our preachers meeting, and so I host it all the time. And preacher at the Dexter Church of Christ grew up in a Protestant church, and they sang a song called "Blow the Trumpet in Zion," which is associated with the Gaithers, if you listen to religious music. Here is the lyrics. They rush on the city, they run on the wall. Great is the army that carries out His word. They rush on the city, they rush on the wall. Great is the army that carries out His word. The Lord utters His voice before His army. The Lord utters His voice before His army. Blow the trumpet in Zion. Blow the trumpet in Zion. Sound the alarm in my holy mountain. And it repeats that in the chorus. And he laughed and said that song is based on Joel chapter 2, specifically verse 1. If you read Joel chapter 2 and verse 1, the army of the Lord is actually referring to either the Assyrians or the Babylonians that is coming to destroy Jerusalem. So this song is written as if the church is the army of the Lord, but it's based on a passage where God's people are being punished. What's my point? Somebody ignored the context. Poets do that a lot. The problem is when you're dealing with the Word of God, that's a very dangerous habit to be in, ignoring the context. When it comes to the Bible, context is king. You always have to interpret passages based on the context. And I bring that up because we sing the song, Jesus, Rose of Sharon, and Jesus is the Lily of the Valley, both songs of which are based on Song of Solomon chapter 2 and verse 1, and it's not talking about Jesus. The Israelites did not like, let me reword that. Later Jews did not like the idea that a book would be about love and references to the physical body the way Song of Solomon does. And so they turned it into a metaphor for God's love for Israel. Well, early Christians followed that thinking and they interpreted it as a metaphor for Christ's love for His church. Well, even if you interpret it that way, which is wrong, but even if you interpret it that way, chapter 2, verse 1 is talking about the bride, not the bridegroom. In which case, it's not Jesus who's the Rose of Sharon and the Lily of the Valley. It's the church that is the Rose of Sharon and the Lily of the Valley. So we still ignored the context. Family, we always have to understand the context of Bible verses. You don't want to be taken out of context and made to say something you did not say or did not intend to say. We ought to be even more cautious when we're dealing with words out of the mouth of God and interpret it in its context. And Song of Solomon is poetry. And we're really going to illustrate that if we get to chapter 4. So, chapter 2, verse 1. The bride is speaking, and you should have a translation of the Bible that divides up the Song of Solomon based on who is speaking, because it really helps you interpret the text. So chapter 2 and verse 1, I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valley. The rose of Sharon, well, both of these flowers were very common flowers. We don't know exactly what flower Solomon is referring to when he writes this. Crocus, daffodil, narcissus. They were pretty flowers, but they were common flowers, ubiquitous. So this statement that the bride is making basically is saying, I'm just common. I'm just a common, ordinary flower. What role does humility play in a marriage relationship? Big. In what way, Gail? How long have you and Dave been married? 57 years. Will it be 58 sometime this year? You just finished 57. Okay. Congratulations. So how does humility play into a 57-year marriage? Thinking more of the other than you do yourself. Look back at chapter 1, verse 8, where Solomon is speaking, and he says to his bride, you are the most beautiful among women. She says, I'm a common, ordinary flower. He says, you're the most beautiful among women. What if Solomon said, I am the most beautiful of all flowers? How many would want to be married to him? So if we change our mentality where we look at our spouse as if they are the best, and we don't think of ourselves that way, they'll probably make for a good marriage. If we approach our spouse as if I am God's gift to you, that's going to reflect on our behavior. But if we treat our spouse as if you are God's gift to me, that is also going to impact our behavior. Got any thoughts? Cody, you want to? Shh, no. Any thoughts?
Well, there's a country song that I'm reminded of. She don't know she's beautiful.
Yep. Yeah, she don't know she's beautiful. She doesn't know she's beautiful, but when you're writing poetry, you just ignore English grammar, right? Who sang that? Anybody know? Off the top of your head? Sammy Kershaw, okay. All right. The bride continues speaking in verses 3 through 10. The groom speaks, verse 2. Like a lily among the thorns, so was my darling among the maidens. What's he saying there?
Pretty much putting down all the other women around her.
Yeah. Did you say something, Betty? He's one of the thorns. Most men are. Yeah, so he's comparing her to everybody else, and she rises to the top, right? So very important for us to have that mentality.
But you know, thorn is not bad. A thorn is protective.
Thorn is protective, and in fact, since you brought that up, Betty, that leads right into the next paragraph. As the bride continues talking, listen to what she says. Like an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so was my beloved among the young men. In his shade I took great delight and sat down, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. Why does she compare him to an apple tree?
He's got more than just being a tree. There's, for one thing, that he's got the fruit from it.
She's not saying he's a lump on a log, is she?
Well, it could have been any fruit tree. It seems like an apple tree or a fruit tree, in this case an apple tree, in a forest. That'd be out of place, wouldn't it? Kind of makes the image that the apple tree stands out amongst the crowd.
Okay. And look at the end of verse 3. In his shade I took great delight, and his fruit was sweet to my taste.
Provided protection.
Provision, protection. Shade carries the idea of protection. Betty mentioned protection. Shade provides protection, right? That's what she specifically mentions. Comfort. Fruit is satisfying needs, right? So that's what she perceives in him. He's providing protection. He's providing sources of her need. Verse 4, he has brought me to his banquet hall, and his banner over me is love. There is a song we sing at Bible camp based on that verse. He invites us into his banquet table, and his banner over us is love. Has hand motions to it. The banner here is military imagery. Banquet hall probably carries the idea of a king feeding his soldiers underneath the banner. So, understanding that this is military imagery, what does that suggest? What's he providing for her? Security, protection. Right? One of the greatest needs that a woman has is security, financial security. Willard Harley in the book His Needs, Her Needs. Verse 5, sustain me with raisin cakes. Doesn't sound appetizing to me. Refresh me with apples because I am lovesick. Let his left hand be under my head and his right hand embrace me. How important is non-sexual embracing, touching? How important is that for a marriage? I need to quit asking questions like that. Elaborate.
Touching is important in all aspects of life.
Yep.
One of the downsides of this pandemic is the lack of social touching, handshakes, hugs, that sort of stuff.
Right.
And even more important in a marriage is the need to be felt.
Yep.
And by the way, on verse 5 there, if you have a King James version like that, it says, I am sick of love. So
Sick of love.
that's what it says.
Sick from love.
I'm just telling you, that's what it says.
Yeah.
Sick of love. It's love sick though.
Right.
You mentioned the non-sexual touch. It needs to be that kind of a touch.
Mm-hmm.
The closeness and tenderness, without it has to lead.
Right. It doesn't have to lead to the bedroom. Just holding hands, arms together, whatever. Again, one of her greatest needs, affection, according to Willard Harley. Verse 7 is the groom speaking. Apparently, now, I told you last week that we know who is speaking based on pronouns and verbs. Hebrew verbs, you, whatever, you run, has got a different form if it's masculine or feminine. Of course, he and she runs, it's got a different form, masculine or feminine. So normally we can tell who is talking based on pronouns and based on the gender of the verbs. But this verse, and he repeats it again in chapter 3, we're not exactly sure who is speaking, but I'm going to assume it's the groom. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the hinds of the field, that you do not arouse or awaken my love until she pleases. Can you force your spouse to do anything?
You can, but it's not wise.
You can, but it's not wise. Donna? No, it doesn't mean the same thing. It's like that little boy who got into trouble and was sent to the corner for timeout, to go sit in the corner in timeout. And he told his mom, he said, I'm sitting on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside. Your spouse might do what you want them to do with that kind of mentality, but we as human beings just don't do things well if we're forced to do it right. You just got to be patient. If a behavior has to change, you've got to be patient. You just don't awaken love before it's time. When we were courting, I chased Rachel around the Jackson County Fair. I just couldn't get her to stop and let me catch her. I had to be patient. In fact, she was getting over one relationship, and she said, basically, I'm putting words in her mouth, but this was the outcome of what she said. I'm going to put you on the back burner and see what's going to happen with him. Well, I didn't have any other option. I just had to wait. Don't force things. You just got to be patient. Bride speaks again in verse 8. Listen, my beloved. Behold, he is coming, climbing on the mountains, leaping on the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Behold, he is standing behind our wall. He is looking through the windows. He is peering through the lattice. Now, just briefly, why would she compare him to a gazelle or a stag? Whenever there's metaphors and similes, other figures of speech in the Bible, we have to ask ourselves, what's the comparison? He doesn't have antlers, obviously. What's the comparison? Strong, agile. Young, vigorous, virulent. Those might be the ideas that she's suggesting. My beloved, I'm reading verse 10. My beloved responded and said to me, arise, my darling, my beloved one, and come along. For behold, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone. The flowers have already appeared in the land. The time has arrived for pruning the vines, and the voice of the turtle dove has been heard in our land. The fig tree has ripened its figs, and the vines in blossom have given forth their fragrance. Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, and come along. Why? Spring. It's a beginning. We're liking spring right now, right? We got 2 days back to back of 70-degree weather. What does spring symbolize? Renewal. Somebody over here? Newness of life. What do you do? See, I'm reading word in this question now. What do you do to keep your marriage from falling into a rut? How do you keep it new? Got to think of new things to do together. In that book that we used last fall in our marriage class, there was a list in the back of, 50 different things that you could do together, or that you could do that you might like to do, like going to a play, things like that. And one of the couples went through there. You need to do it separately and then compare the list. And one of the couples went through there and compared their list and realized that they had common interests that they didn't realize they had. And they've been married for 2 decades. How do you keep your marriage from falling into a rut? You do new things. Or you do old things in new ways. You turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. Sue?
Well, communication is a good part of that. You figure out if you've got things in common, you gotta communicate.
Gotta communicate.
Remember the old things that we're going to do.
Remember the old things? We're going to get to that point also tonight, hopefully. But yeah, remember the old things you did and do them again. You probably heard older people say, and now that I'm getting to be an older person, I'm going to have to quit saying that, right? But older people say that you need to never stop dating your spouse. It is so easy to fall into a rut. It is so easy to fall into a rut of doing the same thing over and over every day. Don't be afraid to do something new.
Even if it turns out bad, you can laugh about it.
If it turns out bad, you can laugh about it. Do something new, something different. Don't fall into a rut. The groom speaks in verse 14. O my dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the secret place of the steep pathway. Let me see your form. Let me hear your voice. For your voice is sweet and your form is lovely. Anticipation of being together, doing something new. Verse 15, this is the chorus, the narrator, if it was a play. The chorus comes in and sings, and this may be the daughters of Jerusalem that Solomon has been referring to. We don't know, but that might be who it is. Verse 15, catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that are running the vineyards while our vineyards are in blossom. Why bring up the foxes? What are the foxes doing? Causing problems. Running through the vineyards, eating the grapes. Life has its distractions. Sometimes they can be, my mannerisms could be a distraction. If Rachel is wanting us to be lovey-dovey and I've got a mannerism that's annoying, it's distracting. But it could also be other things outside. Work is a distraction. Part of our problem is that we let work take precedence over our spouse. Or we let our children take precedence over our spouse. And I'm talking to most of you that are way beyond that in your lifespan, but once a child gets past 2 years old, they should not be the center of the family anymore. Up to 2, they have to be because they've got needs that they can't provide. But after 2 years old, they should be put in second place. And the husband or the wife comes in first place.
Kick them out, get a job.
That's right. You're 3 years old, go get a job. I want you out of the house for 8 hours.
But also, grandparents have that same problem. They let their grandchildren.
Yep. Yeah, grandparents can't let grandchildren take precedence over the spouse either. Good point. So there are distractions like foxes running through, and we have to be careful about that and deal with those. In verse 16, verses 16 and 17, the bride speaks again. My beloved is mine and I am his. Rachel lost her wedding band when we lived down in Kentucky, apparently in our garden. And so we got her a new one. And we happen to know a jeweler in Tennessee. He's actually the father-in-law of the man who co-edits the Christian Family magazine with me. And so Rachel was able to design a wedding ring herself. I told him how much we could spend, and he said, I'll do it for you. And she chose this verse right here. It's actually inscribed on the side of a ring in Hebrew. So if you want to see it, just ask her to show it to you. But it says, my beloved is mine, and I am his. And she'll say that. Chapter 6, verse 3, chapter 7, verse 10. He pastures his flock among the lilies until the cool of the day, when the shadows flee away. Turn, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of Bether. I am my beloved, and my beloved is mine. What is that? What is that portraying? Confidence. Oneness. Unity, yeah. To each other, right? Commitment. Commitment to each other. That means that our relationship comes first. And that's why humility is so important. If my relationship comes first, then my wants come second. That's commitment. Everything else that's going on in my life takes second fiddle to my relationship with my spouse. That's commitment. Any thoughts? The bride continues to speak in chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. And now chapter 3 is divided into 2 poems, 2 smaller poems, verses 1 through 5 and 6 through 11. The bride's thoughts here sound like it's a dream maybe daydreaming, but it sounds like it's referring to the loss of her youthful innocence. On my bed, night after night, I sought him whom my soul loves. Underline that phrase. I sought him, but did not find him. I must arise now and go about the city and the streets and in the squares. I must seek him whom my soul loves. Underline that. I sought him, but did not find him. The watchmen who make the rounds in the city found me, and I said, have you seen him whom my soul loves? Underline that. Scarcely had I left them when I found him whom my soul loves. Underline that. I held on to him and would not let him go until I had brought him to my mother's house and into the room of her who conceived me. She was out looking for her groom, having a hard time finding. We don't know what's going on. Again, we don't know if this was reflecting reality or not. That's beside the point. But she's looking for her groom and she can't find him. What kind of uncertainties are there in marriage? When a couple is engaged, and that's apparently what we're looking at here, what uncertainties are there as they're anticipating their marriage?
You're saying they're engaged?
Yes. Yeah, he actually calls her his bride in the next chapter.
Well, there's an outreach and uncertainty, how are you going to get along with the in-laws? How are you going to make a living? How are you going to support your wife? How is she going to like you in the long term?
Are you going to have kids?
Yeah.
How are you going to raise kids? Are the kids going to be healthy? Are you going to have any health issues? How are you going to deal with that if they do have health issues? Rachel was concerned about how she was going to feed me. She grew up washing the clothes. That was her chore around the house. Her dad did the cooking, and he didn't invite anybody in the kitchen to teach them. He had 2 girls. So Rachel was concerned about how she's going to feed me when we got married. I said, I could read a recipe. Uncertainties.
Even the elders, the volunteers, is in this, it's like, is he going to be there? I can't find him.
Yeah, is he even going to be there?
You're not married yet, even though you pledged your love to each other, it's still not final.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or out of the 8 million people in the world, is this the right one for me?
Is this even the right one? Am I making the right choice? My brother asked me that the night before he got married. I was 16 years old, and he said, Paul, am I making the right decision? What 16-year-old knows the answer to that question? In hindsight, the answer was no, because their marriage ended in divorce. But I'll tell you what, if he was asking that question the night before the wedding, he should have called it off right then. That should have been enough to say, let's put the brakes on here. We don't know where this is going. But otherwise, how do you deal with uncertainties? Your spouse has uncertainty. How do you deal with it? Do you minimize it? Do you mock it? How do you handle it? You talk about it. Talk about it and pray about it. Donna? Pray together. If there's something that can be done to alleviate the concern, then do it. Don't just talk about it. Do something about it. And if you can't do anything about it, then you give it into God's hands. Sometimes you have to get away from each other for a while. Yeah. Clear your mind and let you think. Any other thoughts? Verse 5, again, is an echo of chapter 2, verse 7. And we don't know exactly which person is speaking in this verse, but I'm going to guess it's the groom. So he says, I adjure you. Now, I adjure is legal language. That's the language of an oath. He's swearing an oath. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the gazelles or by the hinds of the field, that you will not arouse or awaken my love until she pleases. What purpose does it serve to swear an oath in marriage? What's that word that we use to describe the relationship in marriage? Marriage is a covenant. Commitment, but I was looking for covenant. Covenant is legal language. What's the purpose does it serve to swear an oath in marriage? To stand there, not in front of the preacher and family and friends, but in the eyes of God, and say, I give my body, my soul, my heart to you until death separates us. What purpose does that serve?
Making a public declaration.
A public declaration of your commitment, right? Betty? Oh, yeah. You should remember it. When problems come up or whatever comes up, when the uncertainties of life come up, you remind yourself, I made a commitment, and I'm going to stick with it. And boy, if there's anything God requires of His children, is faithfulness. And faithfulness means I'm dedicated to this relationship. Any other thoughts? The second poem is the chorus singing, and this sounds like the wedding day. Not that the wedding is taking place, but it's anticipation of the coming together. The chorus sings, what is this, or who is this coming up from the wilderness like columns of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all scented powders of the merchant? Behold, it is the traveling couch of Solomon, 60 mighty men around it, of the mighty men of Israel. All of them are wielders of the sword, expert in war. Each man has his sword at his side, guarding against the terrors of the night. King Solomon has made for himself a sedan chair from the timber of Lebanon. He made its post of silver, its back of gold, and its seat of purple fabric, with its interior lovingly fitted out by the daughters of Jerusalem. Go forth, O daughters of Jerusalem, and gaze on King Solomon with a crown, with which his mother has crowned him on the day of his wedding, on the day of his gladness of heart. Here we have Solomon, pictured in all of his royal glory. And scholars suggest that this symbolizes the honor, the glory that is a man's when a woman agrees to be a spouse. You know, we joke sometime about we men marrying up. It's an honor for a woman to say, yes, I'll give my life to you. I'll give my heart, my body, my soul to you. So here's the royal wedding. Now, I got a picture of the British wedding up there. You know, I've said over and over again that I have no use for royalty. I like to, you know, when Meghan Markle had her public spat on Oprah Winfrey show or whatever it was, somebody posted on Facebook, I'm glad I'm American so I don't have to worry about what's going on in the British royalty. That's me. But here we've got King Solomon coming to his wedding. And when a woman says yes, that should make us feel like royalty. To go back to a comment Betty made earlier, maybe it was Donna, do you remember the happiness of your wedding day? Do you have an image from your wedding day that you keep in mind all the time? And I ask that because Rachel and I do. It was actually caught by a candid photographer. It's us after the wedding, and our wedding was in the front of Rachel's parents' house down in Georgia in the middle of August outside, but I won't go into that. We were inside the house standing under a ceiling fan. And I remember basically what Rachel said. You can't tell this from the picture. From the picture, it looks all sweet and googly-eyed stuff. But she was putting her hand on her stomach. She said, I'm so hot, I'm sick. Well, that's the last thing you want to happen is your bride to throw up all over you. But we've got that image where we're just staring into each other's eyes. You don't have to answer the question, but do you have one? Do you remember your wedding day? That's what we have to go back to. We talked about how do we keep newness in our marriage? We go back and do the same things we did before. Now, we may have lost interest in those things. That's okay. Do something new. We're trying to get out of the rut. That's the problem. It's not the big things that destroy most marriages. It's the small things that we allow to build up because we don't forgive or we don't ignore them or whatever. All right, the last chapter that we'll cover tonight. Listen to Solomon's description. Here is the groom speaking, verse 1. How beautiful you are, my darling, how beautiful you are. Your eyes are like doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats that have descended from Mount Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of newly shorn ewes, which have come up from their washing, all of which bear twins, and not one among them has lost her young. Your lips are like a scarlet thread, and your mouth is lovely. Your temples are like a slice of a pomegranate behind your veil. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built with rows of stones, on which are hung 1,000 shields, all the round shields of the mighty men. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle, which feed among the lilies, until at the cool of the day, when the shadows flee away. I will go my way to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense. You are altogether beautiful, my darling, and there is no blemish in you. A friend of mine ran a drawing in his church bulletin several years ago from a man who literally drew this image of the bride. Wouldn't you want to be married to somebody looking like that? Now that's the problem with taking poetry literally. Now this isn't intended to be taken literally, is it? Count how many similes are in that text. You are like this, you are like that. Similes are a big red flag. We're talking figurative language here. But, as I mentioned before, what is the point of the comparison? Just to take an example, verse 1. Your eyes are like doves behind your veil. What's the point? What's the comparison? Sparkly flutter. That sounds like a Texan, doesn't it? What else? Any other suggestions? Small. A woman needs to speak up. I don't know about gray, but soft I could see. Yes.
Wait, it was a woman who said that.
I understand. Soft, gentle. Don't doves carry that connotation of being gentle? Peace. Doves are a symbol of peace. The word for dove and pigeon are the same words in Romanian. But I had a hard time thinking of the Holy Spirit descending in the form of a pigeon. It just doesn't sound right. Okay, what about... we don't have to do all of these. You can do those on your own. What about your hair is like a flock of goats? Well, obviously, we're not ancient Hebrews, are we? What's the comparison? Okay. A lot of beautiful hair. Yeah.
Along that line, would a flock of goats be worth a lot of money?
Yes. Yes. So value.
Well, when it says leaping down the slope of Gilead, it makes me think of flowing.
Flowing. Lively. Vitality, maybe. Yeah. See? Okay. Y'all are thinking. How about verse 2? Your teeth are like a flock of newly shorn ewes, which have come up from their washing, all of which bear twins, and not one among them has lost her young. She's got all of them. Okay, now remember, we're talking about an age where dentistry really wasn't a thing. Okay, so and we just take healthy teeth for granted, right? They didn't have that. Now, I'm reading George Washington's biography right now. I'm almost finished. I'll finish Friday if I don't have any interruptions. But President Washington had problems with his teeth. Eventually, he only had one tooth in his head. The rest of them were fake. They actually paid slaves to pull their teeth and give them to them and use human teeth for their dentures. So, she's got a mouthful of white teeth. How about your neck is like the Tower of David, built with rows of stones on which are hung 1,000 shields, all the round shields of the mighty men. What do you think?
Pretty solid.
You got a solid neck. You could be a linebacker. No, wait, they don't have any necks. What's the comparison? Strong. What could the shields be? I'm guessing jewelry, necklaces. So we've got the Tower of David that's got shields hanging on it, ready to grab in case of an invasion or whatever, but she's got necklaces or whatever, ornamentation around her neck. Verse 5, breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle which feed among the lilies. Tenderness, probably, is the imagery here. And he summarizes it in verse 7, you are altogether beautiful, my darling, and there's no blemish in you. Don't we need to express our admiration for our spouse? We're not talking necessarily about admiration for physical features. That can go a long way, but it shouldn't just be limited to that, right? Express your admiration for who they are as a package deal. I challenge you sometime to make a list of the positive qualities of your spouse and make a list based on the number of years you've been married. So Rachel and I have got 26 years this year in August. 26 attributes of Rachel that I love, respect, appreciate, admire. Then give it to her on her anniversary. Song of Solomon is a poem about love. Well, how do you inflame love? How do you renew love? You got to do something about it, not just talk about it. Not just pray about it, you got to do something about it. I think we can finish in the next couple of minutes. Second song here, verses 8 through 15. Groom speaks. Come with me from Lebanon, my bride. May you come with me from Lebanon. Journey down from the summit of Ammana, from the summit of Senir and Hermon, and from the dens of lions, from the mountains of leopards. You've made my heart beat faster, my sister, my bride. You've made my heart beat faster with a single glance of your eyes, with a single strand of your necklace. He talks about her eyes a lot, hasn't he? It's probably the one attribute of her that he's talked about more than anything else. Her eyes.
Your eyes speak.
They do.
You just tell looking at somebody in their face and read their eyes.
Yeah. Right. Your eyes communicate a lot. In this context, your eyes can be seductive, can't they? Your eyes can be sensual.
They can be gray
They can be gray.
and fuzzy.
And fuzzy. Did she say fuzzy? She said. Does Penny have fuzzy eyes?
No,
Okay.
brown eye.
Okay. All right. What makes your heart flutter about your spouse? What does your spouse do that makes your heart flutter? Just looking at you sometimes, yeah. Have you told them? Soft touch. We got to communicate. This is what I like. You know, if we are thinking I'm going to do for him what makes me feel good, that's not going to go anywhere. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. We got to communicate. All right, verse 10. How beautiful is your love, my sister, my bride. Sister here is a term of endearment. Obviously, they're not literally brother and sister. How much better is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your oils than all kinds of spices. Back in chapter 1 and verse 2, she had said that his love is better than wine. Now they're quoting each other. They knew what each other meant. Yeah, they're speaking the same language, right? We avoid arguments when we learn to speak the same language. And when we're arguing, it's because we're not speaking the same language. We need to shut up the arguing and start listening. Verse 11, your lips, my bride, drip honey, honey and milk are under your tongue, and the fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. A garden locked is my sister, my bride, a rock garden locked, a spring sealed up. Your shoots are an orchard of pomegranates with choice fruits, henna with nard plants, nard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all the trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, along with all the finest spices. You are a garden spring, a well of fresh water, and streams flowing from Lebanon. Why does he use all of these different plants and aromas and spices to describe her? He's just overwhelmed, isn't he? He's overwhelmed with the beauty of the sight and the scent of her fragrances and the sounds of her voice. He's got sensory overload, doesn't he? Any other thoughts before we get to verse 16, the last verse in the chapter? Chapter 4, verse 16, and chapter 5, verse 1 are the heart of the poem. This is the coming together. She says, awake, O north wind, and come, wind of the south. Make my garden breathe out fragrance. Let its spices be wafted abroad. May my beloved come into his garden and eat its choice fruits. She's calling on nature to come to her assistance, to reach out to her groom as they come together. So how much thought do we put into our love? Do we just expect love to happen by accident? Because it ain't. How much thought do we put into it?
I was thinking about that, and as we're reading through this, they're obviously very in love with each other, you know, and you think about the young people today and that people coming together, it's not always about that text.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of sad how marriages come together nowadays, you know.
Yeah. Too frequently that's shallow. It's self-centered. It's what are you going to do for me? And that's the reason why they divorce in a month.
People are not really committed if it doesn't work out that well.
And that goes back to the emphasis that we've been making on commitment. You got to be committed because you're going to disagree. You are going to have arguments. You are going to see things differently. And if you don't have that commitment, you walk away. You throw up your hands and say, I'll go find somebody who will do things my way.
And it's sad that that's kind of encouraged, you know. If it doesn't work out, whatever, you know.
Right. Right. Yeah. Right. Which, of course, it goes without saying that whole attitude is just unpleasing to God. Okay, any other thoughts We'll take a look at chapters 5 and 6 next week. Okay. Thank you for being here.